Retro Wednesdays are back, baby! While not yet a weekly series, I thought, what game could I reintroduce the video series with? And honestly, there was only one game that sprung to mind, and that was the original Shining Force on the SEGA Genesis. Shining Force was released in North America on July 13th, 1993, and a year and change after it made its debut on the Japanese Mega Drive back in 1992. Now, before we go any further, I should note that a remake was released for the Game Boy Advance in 2004, and there have been many different releases of this classic title on a variety of systems over the years. As recently as 2021 for the Nintendo Switch Online Plus expansion pack. I know, it's a mouthful. Needless to say, this isn't a hard game to find, but I want to rewind the clock back to 1993 so that we can talk about Shining Force in all its glory on the SEGA Genesis. Now, I can't talk about Shining Force without talking about another strategy RPG, Fire Emblem. I don't care what anyone says, including the director of the Shining Force series, I might add. It is evident that this game was heavily influenced by the Fire Emblem series, which came out originally on the Famicom back in 1990. And yes, I know the series director says he was inspired by Dragon Quest and not Fire Emblem, but I'm sorry, the two share way too much in common for me to believe him. Anyways, as one of the few North Americans to have played Fire Emblem on the original Famicom back when it was brand new, you have no idea how utterly excited I was for Shining Force. While I thought Shining in the Darkness was a great game, and one that I will review, it just kind of sucked having to keep track of your location by literally drawing a map by hand. I really never liked that, and I was thrilled when Shining the Holy Ark for the Saturn was released because it had a built-in map system. So what does that have to do with Shining Force? Well, Shining Force takes place within the same universe as Shining in the Darkness, and it does share a lot in common. Except, well, it's an entirely different genre. Fire Emblem really resonated with me. I just loved its chess-like gameplay where different classes were strong against others and how you moved your units across this grid-like battlefield. Shining Force takes a very similar approach, except the graphics and audio are absolutely incredible. Back when this game was released, the Fire Emblem series was only on its second entry with Fire Emblem Gaiden, which was released in 1992. Mystery of the Emblem, the third game in the series, and the first on the Super Nintendo, would only get released in 1994. So what you're seeing here was really the first strategy RPG that I had played on a 16-bit system, and it literally blew my mind. I mean, just look at this compared to the Famicom Fire Emblem game. The difference is huge. Shining Force takes place in the Kingdom of Guardiana, where you take on the role of Max, a soldier in the King's Guard. When the village is attacked, all hope teeters on your decisions. What will you do? Will you take charge of the Shining Force or not? Well, you kind of don't have a choice. The Shining Force is a ragtag group of soldiers who are hell-bent on stopping a vile enemy before they take over the land. While at first this probably seems very traditional, especially with the soldiers, mages, archers, knights, and the sort, before too long you'll be accompanied by dragons, all manner of bizarre creatures and different characters. There are 30 different units in total who make up the Shining Force by the end of the game, but you can only ever have 10 on the battlefield at any given time. And yes, you can easily miss a bunch of characters if you don't go into the villages and talk to everybody. So this forces you to select your units wisely, as only those that deal direct damage to enemies, or better still, kill them, will actually earn experience. And yes, you can grind to your heart's content by returning to the villages before you end the mission. I personally find that I'll get like 10 characters that I really enjoy using, and I stick with them throughout the adventure. Gameplay is broken up pretty much identically to Fire Emblem, or the Nintendo Wars series. You move your units on a grid, and then attacks and spells are played out in sort of like cutscenes of sorts. If you've played any of those legacy Nintendo series, you know precisely what I'm talking about. It's exactly the same. Depth is added to the gameplay by soldier class, with some being stronger than other types, and also with their placement within the maps themselves. So for example, if you're on a mountain range and your enemy is on a regular grass tile, you'll be in a better position both offensively and defensively. So placement is important, as is the type of weapon you're using against a specific enemy type. Each character you meet along the way has their own, often very short, backstory on why they're fighting. Unlike Fire Emblem, there is no permadeath, so when your characters die, and believe me, they will, you can simply pop back to town and resurrect them at your local church. If Max dies, you lose half of your gold a la Dragon Quest, and the more you have to resurrect your pals, the more costly it gets. I should also mention that the AI isn't really the best here, and while some have said this is a comparison to the Dragon Quest series, whereby enemies would still try to use a spell even when they didn't have MP, I don't really buy it. I think this was actually a programming error, as things get vastly improved in Shining Force 2 and 3. So what exactly am I talking about? Well, for example, if an enemy is attacking one of your characters and you're down to 1 HP, instead of finishing you off, they might go and attack someone else. It's just not really that smart. As your troops level up, you'll have the opportunity to promote them once they hit level 10, although I've always raised my levels to 20 before promoting them to give them the greatest HP and MP, but hey, that's just me. I want to extend the experience as much as possible. And speaking of which, each map takes around an hour or so to complete, and you can quick save during the combat or back at town by visiting a priest like Dragon Quest. I truly love this game, guys. I think it's one of the very best games ever released on the SEGA Genesis. It looks and sounds amazing. I just always adored the colors and the brilliant sound effects and soundtrack. I've always said that Camelot developed some of the very best SEGA Genesis games, or just SEGA games in general, because they just felt so different than everything else on the various systems that they were released on. And yes, Camelot, the same folks that make all those Nintendo sports games and developed Golden Sun over the years, they were the original developer of Shining Force, and it should be pretty obvious with the graphics and audio, as you'll no doubt have seen similarities by now. It's such a classic game and truly comes with my absolute highest recommendation, yes, even in 2024. Today, there are so many different ways that you can enjoy this game. I'm playing it on my Analogue Pocket through the open FPGA Genesis core, but feel free to play it any way you can. It holds up perfectly today, and while it can be just a tad slow, if you enjoy strategy RPGs, you will sincerely love this one. Go check it out.